close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. Finding life along the way, melodies we haven't played. No, I don't want no rest. Echoing around these walls, fighting to create a song. I don't wanna miss a beat. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll and we'll grow in number, fueled by them to see.
All right, welcome to the stream. Sorry about that. So, before we start, just wanted to let everyone know if the stream goes out, it could be my power going out. We're getting some crazy storms here on the East Coast. So, yeah, so just wanted to give you a heads up. If you do see the stream go down, that's that's more than likely why. So I want to go ahead and get started. This is part of the NetCheck, I believe we're calling it the dev blog. Basically, where I'm just kind of recording and going through the development process of this NetCheck tool that, hopefully will find its way to network engineers in the future. So we've already made some progress, and we're kind of just going through each individual step, little fixes here and there, adding features, removing features, just your normal development. But tonight, I took some time and actually documented some things that we can do, or that we're going to be doing over the next few streams, because I've noticed, and a few of you brought up in the chat that, hey, like, it's cool that we're, watching you and you're explaining things, but like, where are we going, right? And so I definitely owe it to everyone on this, watching the stream, to kind of indicate where we're going, what we'll be working on, and then also to document any cool ideas that even you bring up. So I've mentioned in the past, hey Nick, how are you doing? Sorry, I had my chat hidden for a sec. Hope you're doing well, Nick. So we're going through, and I'm just going to go through what we have. Some of this has already been documented in this app. I'm using the app Todoist. I've mentioned in the past, but I think I may have brought it up on stream before, but I'm going to start bringing it up, start off the stream with going through our to-do list and things that we have in progress, things that we completed, and then hopefully, everyone is kind of on board and where we're going, and it kind of makes sense. And then obviously, like I said, if there's any sort of valid additions that we can make. If someone has a cool idea, obviously I'll add it to the list, because at the end of the day, this is a tool for the community. So anything I can add to it, and I will for sure. So I'm doing well, but hungry, waiting for dinner. Yeah, this is about your dinner time. I think what was it, 2 weeks ago you were making tacos or something? You're running a little late. All right, cool. Well, thanks for being here. So hopefully, let me know if you guys can see if everything looks all right. I did scale up the view of the web browser, but if it's hard to read, I'm also going to be reading it myself, like reading out loud, but just wanted to kind of make sure you can read it yourself. So we have 3 columns, right? So obviously the project name is NetCheck. We have 3 different columns. It's kind of like a Kanban board. There's different ways to view this, right? So you can have a normal list, or you could do it in this like board fashion. So I figured just do it in a board. It's easier. So for the in progress section, so we'll kind of go over the in progress first, and then we'll go through the to-do list. I believe that's right. Okay, cool. Yeah, so in progress, right? So we have integrate a la carte menu for different tests in the front end. So if you remember, this is our a la carte menu, right? So we did build that out, and more specifically, we built it out for the front end. We do have this other to-do item called designing the solution to integrate those tests into a pyATS test run. So that's more or less taking in the information, parsing it out, figuring out which tests to run, and then how to organize that on the back end. There is some remaining items to do for this item for the integrating the front end. So I'll keep that there in progress. Another thing we've been working on is the device inventory. And there's actually 3 sub items to that. So I'm actually going to bring it up here. So you'll see there's some sub tasks, 3 of them. You'll see add a device feature, which we have. So if we go over to our inventory, we have the add a device feature with the host name and the IP, and you can add a device. So we have that. We'll check that off. An active search, we also have that. So if like I type in RT for router, you'll see it searches through. So we have that. And the ability to delete devices. So we don't have that. So that's kind of one last subtask for this inventory system we're putting in place. I'm still trying to figure out the best way to do that. I'd like to be able to put like an extra column right here, or append like a delete box here. So that's more front end action, and so I got to think about how I want to do that, because I'm definitely not a front end developer. Honestly, the only tools at my disposal are kind of what I'm comfortable using is your vanilla JavaScript, jQuery, or HTMX, which I've mentioned in the past. So honestly, we'll have to figure that piece out. Maybe we'll take a look at that tonight. So we have that one remaining item, and then we'll basically count the device inventory done. Obviously, there's going to be some optimizations, but the point and what I'm trying to get to with all these different to-do items is just to get an initial implementation completed. Another thing to mention real quick, so you'll notice these circles are all different colors. So I kind of use these as a way to prioritize each of the tasks. So red is a P1 or priority 1. Orange is like a priority 2. And then blue is kind of your lower level priority 3. And so you'll see we have a couple reds, a couple oranges, a couple blues. I kind of just wrote them down as I see they're needed, right? So like as an example, the first item in our to-do list, in our to-do section, is create a layer 2 test script, pyATS test script. I don't find that to be a very high, like urgent matter only because we have working test scripts right now, and we still need to organize how we're going to do our custom validation test script or test run. So I don't want to overhype it up. Obviously, we'll get it done at some point, but there's some other things that I'd like to get 100% done first before we dive into the test script itself. So, all right, so we checked out the first two items, and then this one I was actually working on before the stream. I consider it a P1. Some may not consider it a P1, but to me, I thought it was very important because it has to deal with user feedback and kind of that user experience. So for the web front end, disabling the submit button when a job is kicked off, and this is specifically for the custom validation. So I actually got it working. So like, we typed in a test name, so we'll do like test 1. You could plug in stuff over here. And then when you click on run test, before there was no feedback, right? You could click it and it wouldn't like disable itself. It wouldn't even show you, say, hey, something's running. It would just like, there would be nothing. But now if you click on it, it says test has started, and then it goes away. So it's just a little bit of JavaScript in there to help basically provide you feedback to say, hey, we received the test and it's running. So I'm actually going to go ahead and check this off. Like I said, you can definitely argue that it's not. Actually, hold on. I have to remember, I'm going to add it to the done section and then check it off. So that way we can review at the end. We could see all the tasks that have been completed under the done section. Is it drag and drop to different columns? Are you referring to the custom validation or the inventory, Nick? If you're referring to custom validation, basically it is two different columns. The inventory, this is basically a table. And then each one of these is a table result, and it's a Jinja 2 template in the background, right? So if I pop this up, let's find it, partial inventory. So this is the table. So this section here, everything below the search button, all this is right here. It's a Jinja 2 template. So that's kind of where I'm like, I can add in like another table item, right? Because last item is serial number. I can add in like another item here to be like some sort of trash icon, and allow you to click it, and then when you click it, it maybe make an API call back to delete the record. I don't know. I still got to figure that piece out, the order of operations. Once I figure out the order of operations for the delete, then we'll move forward with actually putting in like a little icon and figure out the function from there. Oh, the task. I just saw you drag it. Oh yeah, yeah. So they are drag and drop, and you can put multiple. That probably I'll fix to where you can't do multiple. I also need to figure out, and this actually will lead into what we're looking at tonight, is how to best organize these different test cases, right? Because at the end of the day, like we have to, on the back end, we have to take in all this data and then figure out, okay, what's going to run and when, right? And in what order, and get basically collect all this data. So actually this brings up a cool little idea. So I'll have to see what the trash icon here does, because ideally just use the same trash icon. So that way we can figure out, when you click on the trash icon, maybe for inventory, because they are devices, I could click on the trash icon and it will maybe pop up an alert and say, hey, are you sure? Yes or no? And, we'll go from there. So that's kind of something, I'm thinking about as well. All right. So back to our to-do list here. So let's go over the to-do items. Some things that I'll be looking at in the next, this stream. Most of it will be in future streams, but so I already mentioned it. The pyATS create a layer 2 test script. Currently, and this is for my knowledge as well. I'm trying to find it here. The test scripts that we have a circuit upgrade one. Basically, we have test scripts for these two use cases. So if you don't want to do, and I guess I'll review this as well. If you don't want to do a custom validation, right? Let's say like you have a specific client, or you're working in a specific enterprise, and let's say you don't run OSPF, right? So you would never use an OSPF test. So maybe there's some specific things that what I would call canned validation cases, right? And that's where, if you click on validation, that's where you get these cases here. You have a circuit upgrade, very common, I would think, especially in the enterprise. You have circuit upgrades all the time. It could just be a simple bandwidth upgrade, or it could be a physical, swapping out circuits, and then a switch install, right? I think that's a pretty common thing as well. You get a request to say, hey, this office is adding more chairs, or more desks, or we need a switch installed at this location. Can you run some validation? Once you do that install, you obviously always validate how everything's looking. Currently, the test scripts that are running, we have a device basics test case, which basically checks for CPU and memory utilization are below 75%. BGP neighbors, right now I basically have it as a minimum of 2 eBGP neighbors are established. So this basically assumes that you have 2 circuits plugged into one router. External connectivity, pinging the PE device, and then logging, ensuring that there's not any logs with a severity level of 3, or error, if you know the different logging levels, Cisco logging levels, or higher. So it searches through the run show log, parses through it, verifies that we don't have any sort of really intense, high severity logs. Same, and then the switch install, run the same basic CPU memory utilization check, verifying the iOS version, right? Because when you install a switch, whether you're adding to an existing stack, or installing brand new, even adding to an existing stack, I've seen some wonky things where, for whatever reason, the new switch isn't, because you have to have the same iOS across the whole stack, but for whatever reason, that new switch, whether you do a reboot or power it on for the first time, power it up, maybe it comes up with an old iOS and causes issues, with the stack. It just verifies the iOS image for the whole stack. Verifying interface errors, so this will go through, verify there's no input errors on the switch ports, and then lastly, the same thing, checking the log severity. Error or higher will show a failure in the test. So like I said, these I kind of see these as they could be built out for this is very specific to whoever uses it, right? And I'm kind of thinking now on how we can make it a pluggable system to where if you wanted to add your own use cases or own I'll call it canned validation cases, you can do that. I just got to figure out, how to do that in an easy way, right? Because I don't want everyone to have to know how to code a pyATS test case or test script. Ideally, something like a YAML document, right? Something that is easily consumable. And so, yeah, I got to figure that out though. What if someone only has a 1-circuit router and a different circuit on another router? Yeah, and I meant to say this, and I probably just skipped over it. Right now, these are just the canned use cases I've just thought of on the fly, but that's very easy to change, and that kind of goes back to ideally, I would like to keep something relative like this where they are just static use cases, but then kind of looking more towards the custom validation where you can define what your use cases are or what your parameters are, right? So let's say for BGP neighbors, instead of just saying, hey, I want a minimum of 2 established eBGP neighbors, you can maybe plug in here somewhere, and it could be simple as like a text box, or some sort of config file, something to where you can say, hey, I actually want only 1, or I expect 1, or I expect 0. Or instead of BGP, I expect OSPF neighbors or EIGRP neighbors, right? So I'm still trying to figure that out, but I just wanted to get something down so that way, it's usable. And if the case is where, you did want, instead of 2, it needs to be 1, I can go back in the code and change that. But before we deploy it, I'd ideally want it to where you can plug in, your values for your specific use case. Is the fields for device host name and device IP both needed for the test? Could there be an option to test a specific circuit? Yes. So that's actually another item. Thank you for reminding me, Nick. I actually need to add a task. Remove host name from static validation checks. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, really, because only the IP address is needed. I have to figure that out. Actually, I'll just put it in there as a note then. Remove host name from static validation checks. And we'll throw a tag on it for that. All right, and we'll keep it a low priority. So the only reason I was asking for a host name and an IP at the same time, and the OS for that matter. And if you were here for the last couple streams, I had this because this is what's required for a pyATS testbed file. But now, since we're using NetMiko's auto detect, we can get rid of the choose device OS. The only issue I have with removing hostname or IP, like removing one or the other, is with a hostname, if that doesn't have a record where I can get an IP address, right? So let's say it doesn't have a DNS record, then the testbed will error out because it won't know how to connect to the device. And then if I plugged in just the IP address, I guess I can auto detect the hostname itself. So if I was to remove 2 of these boxes, it would probably be hostname and OS. Because with the IP, that I know I can SSH to, and then learn the rest of the facts that I need, the operating system and the hostname. What if there's another VRF? Sorry, making it hella complicated. No, I mean, listen, if I want engineers to use it, I should be able to answer some of these questions. So, with the specific VRF, I don't have anything for you. I haven't really put that into thought just yet. IPs are harder to remember than a host name, though. I totally agree with you, Nick. The sad part is not everyone remembers to put in a DNS record for their network device, though. So, when you plug in a host name, if it doesn't resolve, then your test bed's kind of crapped out. But at least with an IP address, I can learn what that host name is. So, I know IP addresses are not as fun to plug in, but that might be the only chance. So yeah, it's tough. It's tough to pick one or the other because it's all about what your experience has been like working at places where they have their host name. They do have a DNS record for every device host name for every device. That obviously links back with the management IP. That's great, but yeah, but Anyways, so yeah, I added it to the list, so I appreciate it. Regardless, thank you for reminding me to add it to the list. All right. So we had the layer 2. Oh, we didn't even go over the test scripts that we have, right? So we have test scripts for circuit upgrade, which I just showed you. These are just pyATS test scripts. And then one for the switch install test script that you also saw. Right. And I haven't looked at these. I wrote these 9 months ago. So there's a good chance that there's some other things I can add to it, or some additional error handling I could add in that maybe I didn't know 9 months ago. So probably need to revisit it, all of them as well. All right. The next item is designing a solution to integrate the a la carte tests. So I think I've showed this in the past, but let me see if I can find. I'm trying to find where it sends, the front end sends a list of the tests to, oh, here we go. Oh, let me grab the mouse real quick. Copy. So just to show you, so this is the JSON that's sent back to that's sent to the backend from the front end, right? So JavaScript, it uses Ajax to make an asynchronous call to the backend, basically to say, hey, I got the test name from the front end, or from the form or the custom validation page, and then a list of the tests that they plugged into that, that I dragged and dropped, right? So I need a way to figure out, okay, well, once I have this list of tests, how do I go through and say, how do I basically custom build a pyATS test run, right? So you have your different test scripts, which could easily be, all these test scripts could easily be like, each one of the tests that are identified in this list could be its own test script. And then from there, what I could do is organize the test scripts that need to run, right? So let's say I have environment and OSPF, right? So let's say there's I'm just adding to the list here. Let's say we have the environment, checking the environment and OSPF. We would go to our test scripts file, and we would have 2 more test scripts, one called BGP check, or I'm sorry, one called environment check, and the other one would be an OSPF check. And then we could create a job file, and this is kind of where it gets a little hairy. We could create a job file that runs multiple test scripts, right? So you literally can write, like, copy and paste this line about 3 different times, right? So you can do this. So let's say this one checks the environment. This test script would check OSPF, right? So that way this one runs and then this one runs, right? And then all the results would be stored together. So I just have to figure out what that looks like from an organizational perspective, because we also have to look at how we're extracting data and what data gets extracted whenever we run the job. So, and just to put that in perspective of what that looks like, here's some of basically the helper functions. So when we run a pyATS job, we essentially pass in the job file name, right? So we pass in what job file we're looking for. And if we look at the job files, you'll see it's either a circuit job file or the switch install job file. And those are for the 2 static test cases. We haven't built anything for the custom one yet. And then we pass in the current directory. The only reason we pass in the current directory is so if anything changes or moves, The idea is we keep the logs relative to where we're executing it from. So everything's pretty much ran from the root of the project. So, and you can see the pyATS logs here, the pyATS logs folder. So we basically use subprocess run to run, just like you would in a terminal. You would run pyATS run job, the job name. We don't archive this the subdirectories. We do create an archive directory, but I forget what this flag does. No archive subdirectory. I have to look at the docs for that one. And then we basically say where the pyATS logs are going. And you can see here, they're basically zip files. And these zip files, they have all of the artifacts for the job run. So you can see here, the archive name or the name of the pyATS logs is just the current time, and we get the current time literally just by doing datetime.now. So you'll see like the last time we ran a job that actually like went through was July 21st. And so yeah, so that's how we make sure that they're unique and they're stored locally. They're not tracked via Git. You can see how it's like grayed out. So we're not keeping track or syncing that with version control. They're just ran locally. But let me see if I can find. Here we go. All right, so here's some temporary results, or what I call temp results. So basically, what I do. Where did it go? Hold on. I have to find it now. Oh, don't tell me I lost it. Let me see. Helpers. Okay. Yeah, so I already talked about how it's ran. And then this basically just returns the path to the zip file, right? So we ran the job and it returns the path to where the archive folder is. We then get the results, and the way we do that is we unzip the file, we extract only results.json, right? And so results.json is not that, is right here. So this is a file that's stored in that zip file, and and it tells you a lot of data. It gives you a lot of data back. Which actually some of it ends up in our database. But you can see here, start time, stop time, total run, the job file, a summary of, what passed, what failed. Some of this, like I said, some of these values get extracted and passed right to our database. This isn't a good result.json file to review. Basically, it will tell you the tasks that run, and it will give you some more data within it. But you can parse it through, just as you would any sort of JSON file with Python. So you can see here, all we do is convert the results. So we go through, we extract the results.json file, and then down here, we read the JSON file, and then we return it. And we return it as a Python dictionary. So we basically just convert that JSON file, convert it to a Python dictionary, and return it in memory to allow us to do further extraction. You have an idea, option to rerun the last test. That is a good idea. Let me go ahead and plug that in and add that as a task. Option to rerun last test. Pretty straightforward, so I don't really need a description for that. We'll change it to a P3. All right, cool. Yeah, that's a good idea, Nick. Thanks for letting me know. All right, so we've now converted it. And the reason I'm going in order, by the way, it's not because these were written in order, but it doesn't mean they always execute in order. I just know because I wrote a lot of it, I wrote all of the main app file. I know that they do run in order back in the application. So we get the pyATS results, and then we parse through them. So we do expect a couple parameters. We expect a job results argument, which is a dictionary, which is the pyATS results that we parsed out here from that JSON file, and then a test name. And then here's where we basically instantiate a test results object that we've modeled using a pydantic data model, which then can be stored in our database, right? And you can see we actually use the DQ module within pyATS or within Genie. It's a pretty useful library. It allows you to quickly parse JSON files, or dictionaries, without having to run a bunch of for loops. And if you're interested in that, let me see if I can pull it up here. DQ Genie library. And I brought it up on stream before, or talked about it. So DQ stands for dictionary query, and you can quickly, without, traditionally with dictionaries you'd have to do for loops, right? So if I go through, let's just call it this JSON file. If I was to loop through this, you see how nested like it would be to get to this. Let's just say we want to know what branch we're on, right? Branch is master. You can see how deep and nested in the data structure master is, right? So instead of doing that, we can actually, what this DQ library does is it queries the dictionary. And so you'll see here, we find within the job results, we find where, report summary, and then from there we then try to find the specific values, right? Total, passed, and failed tests. And then from there we pass those variables that we parsed out from that dictionary. We then instantiate the test results objects, add those in, create a model of that, and then store it in our database. And all of that happens. After all that happens, that's where you get this results, right? So we get the name, the time the test was executed, the success rate, total test, total pass, total failed. And you can see where it gets that, right? Name, executed at, success rate, total test, or test pass, test failed. So pretty neat. I think it's pretty cool. We have some other ones down here, but I don't want to bore you too much. I feel like I'm talking too much, but I do want to explain why we're doing things. And this is kind of a refresher, even back since we last we're probably looked at this back in like October. So just wanted to put that out there. So where I was going with that, right? So we pass in a custom test name, right? And you can see here when we parse the results, we can get the test name. We can pass in the test name, right? An arbitrary test name, or we can parse it out from the that JSON file we reviewed. But with custom validation, we will pass in the test name, and then we have a list of tests. So you have environment, OSPF. So the key will be, how do we pass these values in and then map them to a test script to run, right? To me, we could do something as simple as a dictionary, right? Where we do a lookup and say, hey, if you find this key, then get the value for that key. And the value for that key will be the name of the test script file. I mean, we could do something like that. trying to think of different ways we can do this. I know pyATS has the concept of a data file. pyATS docs. Right, so let me try to find it here. Data file inputs. Right, so, and I'll zoom in just real quick here because I know it might be tough to read. Hopefully that helps. Actually, I'll do one more because I just saw like a preview of the stream and it didn't really help. Okay, hopefully that helps a little bit more. So your test cases features can be coded, set, leveraged directly within your test script, altering the values between runs. Aside from dynamic parameters and script arguments that require physical script changes, which are not always desirable. Data file feature and AE-test, which AE-test, by the way, is the framework pyATS uses, right? Allows users to run their test scripts with an additional YAML-based input file, allowing dynamic updates or overwrites to the current test script module. It's an optional augmentation to regular script runs, allowing users to easily change script values in various features. So, I don't know if it will, maybe accommodate for what we're thinking about now, but in the future, we talked about how we can potentially change, like Nick brought up, let's say I don't want to check for a minimum of 2 established EBGP neighbors, but I want to go for establish for 1, or look for 1, a minimum of 1. That feature, that data that we collect from this form can be passed into this data file, right? Because it says right here, allows dynamic updates and overwrites to the current test script module with more information, right? So it allows us to pass in dynamic values and arguments. To leverage, run your test script and provide the data file argument. Okay, so and this is the way we're running it now, by the way. We're using run, the script name, and then you just pass in data file as an extra argument. And just to remind you what it looks like, or the way we're using it, if you look at our job file, you'll see run, the test script name, right? So all we'll have to do is add in a data file argument if we want to use this feature. All right, let's see. Once loaded, the content is then is used to dynamically update your test script object. So it updates the script's module and classes directly. Only module and class level attributes and features can be updated. So your common setup, your test cases, and your common cleanup, that works because, like I was saying in the beginning, I don't want to have to create like a bunch of different test scripts. But I can definitely do, it would be different test scripts, and I could put a number of test cases, right? So I could, for example, I could create like a routing test script, and then the test cases I could put in the specific routing protocols and maybe some checks that we do within each of those test cases, right? So it can help generalize a little more. Test cases and common sections defined in the data file must each match to a corresponding class. Okay, so it's just saying if this is, common setup is in the YAML file, then it matches the common setup in your test script, right? Same thing with common cleanup. Test case blocks is basically just give them the class name of your test case. So if we look back at our code here, let's see, test scripts. If we look back at our code, we have a test case called circuit upgrade, right? So we would pass in the name circuit upgrade into our data file. And then if we wanted to add parameters to it, we could. If a test case is looping, using looping sections feature, the base class definition is being looped. The base class definition that is being looped is updated. Okay. So I don't know if we'll have any sort of looping but it's good. That's good to know. Only a single data file may be provided. However, each data file may extend one or more data files. So this, I have some experience using this data file feature. I've tested it out, ran it myself a few times. The way to extend it is really cool. It's basically just like if you tried extending a YAML file using the extends keyword. It basically allows you to create inheritance within. It's kind of like if you've ever done with Jinja 2 templates or Jinja templates, you've used the includes keyword, right? Think of it that way, where you create, it just creates a level of inheritance. And yeah, it's I just wasted my breath. Creating a chaining relationship effect. That's exactly what I was trying to get across. When a data file extends another data file, the other data file forms the basis, and contents of the current data file is then applied on top. So it's a recursive update. So basically you have a base. Let's say you have 3 data files that all extend each other. Your base one, look at your different levels, then overwrite your base one, right? So if let's say we have a base BGP test script and we wanted to add in another one that's called BGP neighbor check, right? Let's say that's a whole separate test script for whatever reason. If there was anything referenced in the BGP test script one, or I'm sorry, the neighbor check one, it could overwrite the original one, right? It's standard, inheritance where the derived class can overwrite the base class. All right, test parameters provided via the various parameters block are updated into the corresponding section's base parameters using dict.update. So the test parameters, let me open that up. Let me see if I can show you a good example. Okay, so I think this probably, and if anyone has ever gone into the pyATS documentation, there's a lot. Like, trust me, it is kind of overwhelming at first. And if it's your first, like if you're just starting out with network automation, I would recommend getting some experience under your belt with some other libraries first, only due to the assumed knowledge that pyATS, requires, whether it's object-oriented programming, the way the test scripts and everything is executed. There is a certain level to it versus, some other libraries. And other libraries you can get up and running quicker, and that's all I gotta say. There's a lot here. There's a lot to digest. That's what I'm trying to get to. But I think more of these diagrams in their documentation, which I know they've done a better job with adding some more, at least for people like me that are visual learners, this helps a lot. So we kind of have the different ways that parameters are kind of superseded, or the level of order of operations, right? So you have test script parameters. So if we open up the test script file, so this is a test script file, right? A test script file has a common setup, test cases, right? So right here we have a circuit upgrade test case, and then we have a common cleanup. And this actually might be a better way to look at it. So common setup required, common cleanup required. A test case is where you dictate what needs checked. So if we go back to our levels here, we have the test script, which is kind of that highest level. It's kind of, think of it like global parameters. Then you have your test case parameters, which is, as you saw in that, circuit upgrade is its own individual test case. You can have multiple test cases in a test script. And then you have test sections. So within your test case, you can have multiple sections. This really isn't a subsection, but it is an individual test, right? So let's say you did have parameters that you wanted to identify within these tests. You could do that, and it would obviously supersede all the test scripts and the test case parameters, right? So it's kind of just like picture it shrinking down to the specific test. And you can see it kind of just, it tells you what happens behind the scenes and everything like that. But all right, back to what we were doing. All right, so moving on, here's a GitHub example. No, it's not. It maybe was a GitHub example. I'll have to check that link out. I don't know. It just took us back to the top of the page. But I know there's one down here. So YAML naturally loads in Python as nested dictionaries. It's possible to provide a dictionary that respects the data file schema. So basically all they're saying is, okay, we're allowing you to create a YAML file that then basically loads into a Python dictionary and then is fed in that way. But the reason they provide it to you in a YAML file is, probably, and trust, I didn't build pyATS. This is not from the developer's mouth, but probably for readability and usability. It's more approachable to write it out in YAML, even though YAML gives its own heartaches and headaches. It definitely, it's easier than telling someone, hey, can you write a nested, produce a nested dictionary of all the different files, and by the way, all the different parameters, and by the way, follow a specific schema. I'm sure, allowing a YAML file to be the user interface is much easier to use. So that's all this was saying. This is saying, hey, if you don't want to use the YAML file, you can just use nested dictionaries. It's recommended to find data objects for different levels, module, common setup, test case, and initialize them with a value, none if no default value is applicable. If you're not defining variables as module or class attributes, they will not be visible to code inspection tools and raise a warning. All right, so we finally made it here to the input or the data file schema. So as they said, and having experience with this, you don't use probably over 50%. I mean, my experience, I haven't used over 50%, and especially if you're just starting out, you won't use over 50% of some of these keywords. But yeah, they mentioned it here as well. Do not be discouraged by the long structure. Most likely you only need a few of these fields. And then beware of YAML's sensitivity to indentation and white space, and that will be a killer for you. If you are comfortable, I mean, honestly, you don't even have to have it configured in your IDE, like a VS Code or anything. If you're comfortable just pasting your YAML into like some sort of YAML lint website, I would recommend doing that, because it'll fix all the indentation and white space for you. Because that's a pain in the butt, especially if it's a nested problem like this, right? You want to make sure that all that indentation and white space is right. Right, so this is all the different keywords, and then all these comments here are just explaining what they do. So that's the extends keyword, where they say, hey, you can only reference one data file in your argument, but data files can build on one another using this extends keyword. Parameters, this is for your test script. So that's your, if you remember, your test script is at the highest level. So if you don't specify any sort of test case, if you just say, hey, from the top level, if you say parameters, it's for your test script, the entire test script. And then you can see here, common setup, you can specify parameters for the common setup. Test cases, so you have a test cases kind of like the high level, or I'm sorry, like the high level key. And then below that, you have a nested all your test case names. Right, so let's say you have multiple test cases, you'd put all the test case names. But in my case, I would just put circuit upgrade as the name, and then underneath of that, I would then fill out the name if I want to. A lot of these are optional, but you can see parameters is there as well. Another interesting topic is the grouping, the way they do grouping. So you can actually group test cases together, or test scripts together. So it may be interesting to figure that out as well, right? To figure out, okay, do we create a test script for, do we create one routing test script and then have test cases for the individual routing protocols? Or do we create a test script for every routing protocol and then the individual tests underneath of that as test cases, right? So we would have a test case to check connectivity. We'd have one to check neighbors. We just have to figure out how we want to do that. So it's going to take a little bit of time and effort. But the nice part is once we have the organization on the back end, then we just have to basically glue and map together the front end values, or the values that are coming from the front end, which just as a reminder, basically they're coming in as a list. So we just have to map, okay, if environment comes in, then we want this test case to run, or this test script to run. And then if we somehow can figure out on the front end to add more values and more context, like maybe we don't want to just know if it's the CPU's less than 75% utilization. Maybe we want it to be 90%, right? Because we feel that if the network's running hot like that, then we're getting our full value from the switch, right? For whatever reason, So we need to figure out ways to take in more values from the front end. And then my thought is we'll take in those values and then add it to our data file as parameters, right? And we can do that at the test case level. We can do that at the test script level. We just have to figure out what makes sense. And it's not something that I'm going to be able to solve tonight, but it is just something that, if we just got to figure it out. Because once we have, this is kind of one of those design decisions that it's going to be tough to revert if we don't organize the test cases properly. Nick suggests test case per code version. Oh, like iOS versus iOS XE. Yeah, so that's a good consideration, Nick, because a lot of our tests, just to show you, and I'll show you some of the ones, I'll show you the circuit upgrade one, right? So our circuit upgrade, well, I forgot that I did this. So remember, the devices are fed in, right? So you have to have a testbed file. The testbed file has your devices in it, and then your devices then have attributes with it. So your operating system, the IP address, the name of the device, everything that you define in a testbed. So it looks like I went through the liberty of basically figuring out, okay, if the device operating system is iOS XE or iOS, we're going to use the Genie APIs available to get the platform CPU load, right? And then if that CPU load is less than 75, so I imagine an integer's returned from this API. I'd have to double check the documentation, but based on the code, it looks like an integer's return. If it's less than 75, then we say it's passed, right? So I guess what Nick was saying is if we have a test case per code version, iOS or iOS XE, I think we should be good. Now, I will say it may get a little crazy if we do try to go beyond, let's say, like 4, let's say, 3 or 4 more, 3 or 4 total operating systems. So, like, and when I say that, operating systems, if we look at Genie parsers, so the reason you have to provide an OS, right, and this goes back to our static test cases here, where I have like a drop down to say iOS or iOS XE. The reason I had that initially before we figured out the NetMiko like auto detect module is because all the parsers and the learn functionality within Genie are dependent on the operating system type. Nick asked, is it an integer or a float? So this was an integer, the 75. The CPU util, that's a good question. Let me figure out since we're in the documentation, let me figure out if it returns an integer or a float. Oh, this is the parser list. APIs. And it's this one. So it returns an integer. To answer your question, Nick, returns an integer. So, and you may ask, for those watching, you may ask like, okay, well, you're saying that device.api.get platform, like where is this coming from? So every device instantiated, the device object, you're able to use basically Genie created device APIs, right? So we've all heard of parsers, right? And let's just go to I'll just open up iOS, right? So show access list, right? It's a common show command. So we take that, we basically run that on the device, we parse it out to this schema that's defined right here, right? And you could go all through it if you want, and it goes through, and then it jumps into showing you for the iOS XE output if it's if there's any differences. What the APIs do, it's pretty cool. Let me use this one as an example. So if we view the source for this API, and then this is the nice part about specifically the Genie parsers and like the Genie parsing library being open source, is because you can see the source code. It's pretty straightforward. So we have a function here, right? And it has a command argument, show processes CPU, which if you're an engineer, you definitely know what that is. And all we do down here, you can see like this is a big doc string, so we'll ignore that. We'll try to parse that command, and we have an exception. And then once we have that parse command, then we go through and basically just regex out the different values, right? And once we have the different values, then you basically it goes through the parse data, finds the value. In this case, we get a return CPU load. And if you remember, when we go back here, you'll see what's returned, CPU load, and it's an integer. So that's the nice part about an API. An API is a very direct, when I say API, a Genie API, it uses the parsers, but it does a very specific action, right? So if you want to know what the CPU load is, right, for the device, then you're going to run get platform CPU load, right? If, for example, let's say you wanted to run some other command, right? You look at that source code and you're like, I don't want show processes CPU. I want some other show processes command, and then parse that. You can do show processes and see all the available show processes CPU history sorted. And so you can do the parsers individually and parse out the values yourself. The APIs just kind of help you with that, if that makes sense. So, yeah. So let's go back to the data file. All right. So we're pretty much done with the data file. Like you can kind of see where we're going with it. You have test cases. The test case, you can name the group that it's part of. You can name the test case if you want to give it a descriptive name that is different from the one that is provided in the test script. And then you have like common cleanup as well. You can put parameters for that and so on. And then you can just put key value pairs to be set as variables, attributes directly in your test script module. So think of these as like, global constants, or I'm sorry, it's not the right, basically global variables, right? And that's what I was going to say. I was going to get to an example test file here. So here we extend sanity data.yaml. I don't know where that YAML file is, but basically we take that file and then just add this one right right underneath of it. If there's overlapping key pairs or values, then this would overlap whatever's in sanity data, right? So let's say IP seed was, instead of 111 in this file, it was 1222 in sanity data. This IP seed, it would overwrite and it would be 1111. So you can see here the parameters. This is your test script parameters, and these are dynamically provided, as you can see. And then if we jump down here to the test cases, you can see they have a my test case 1. They gave it a UID, or unique identifier. They have group names, so it's actually assigned to 3 different groups. And then they have parameters that are fed in. So you'll see 1,000, 2,000, or the key is input 1, 1,000. So these are key value pairs. And then expected routes 35. So this actually is a good example of maybe what and where I'm trying to go with the tool is you should be able to plug in some front end values and say, hey, I'm only looking for, 10 routes, right? And, as this grows, maybe we can say, okay, we'll specify the 10 routes, comma separated, and we'll see what we can do with it. It'll be interesting to see how that works, but you kind of get my point of that. And so, yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with this. I just have to figure out the design aspect of it. Because once we have this down, the design aspect, we can then figure out, okay, what are we gathering or what do we need from the front end or from the users? And then go from there. And then we'll feed those form values in, we'll take them in, do some sanitation, obviously, and then we'll feed them probably into a data file, and then pass that data file then dynamically into a job run, and then you'll have a custom job, right? So I think that might be the plan, but now we have to figure out, okay, how do we want to organize it? I'm just seeing what this is. Example of a run. Okay, so yeah, here's my test case groups. All right. So I guess up next, let me see what else we had here. We'll put this in progress because this is crucial, because once we have the how to integrate those a la carte custom tests, however you want to call it, into a single pyATS run, then we'll be good once we have that design down. I just have to figure out how I want to organize them, and we have to figure out, I guess, the different checks that we want, right? So right now we have two different routing protocol, two different routing protocols, and then just a basic device check, right? We don't have any layer 2 checks. We don't have any physical interface checks, right, for input validation or anything like that. So I gotta think through that as well, and then add them to this list. And then once we have this list solid, then we'll know, okay, here's all of our possibilities, and then we'll figure out how to group them, right? Or create a framework, or create a way to add them in to the system, right? So if we create a routing test script, we have a way to add, for example, EIGRP, right? How would we add that into our routing test script? So something to consider. All right. So, like I said, that's something I got to think about. I'll probably have it ready for next week because I want, like I said, it's going to take a little bit of time just with all the different variables. So I'm going to pause that, put that on hold for a second. Let's take a look at the remaining to-do items. If we have some extra to-do items, then we will we'll work on those. Otherwise, it may be a shorter stream today. I wanted to go through all these to-do items during this stream and then talk through, how we can maybe organize our pyATS the test cases, the test scripts, and then, more of a brainstorming session versus coding. So the last two we already talked about, we actually added to the list. Where do we leave off? Oh, well, we moved the one over. Yeah, so adding unit testing. We've been doing this. We went over a whole stream. We had, last stream or 2 streams ago, we had our different unit tests. They're very basic. I would say some of them I think could pass as like it's an all right, but some of them it's like we're only checking the status code, which I guess could work out, especially for API calls. But we should validate, like, if there's a body, what's the if there's any text, like if there's anything we can validate within that. Nick asks, when's your last week before the family event again? So hoping to make it probably at least 3 more weeks. That's the hope. So we'll see. But yeah, I'll definitely, you'll see, I'll put something out on Twitter just to say, hey, like I'll be out of streaming for a bit. So, I'll definitely let you know. So yeah, we won't, I'll preface this too. We won't get everything done before the family event, as Nick calls it. But that's the beauty of it being out there, open source, right? Anyone can, pick it up, fork it, and keep working on it if they want. Obviously, I'll try to work on it when I can. I don't want to. My goal with this is I don't want to abandon it in any way. I really think this would be a very cool tool to have, and that's why I find it to be like a little mini passion project. And that's why I want to stick with it. So, yeah, I'm definitely not abandoning it in any way, but yeah, there will be a time where I have to take a break from it for a while. And we definitely won't get it done within the next 3 weeks. So yeah, so let's just take a look at the last couple things here. Adding the unit tests, that's an ongoing thing. Honestly, I hate making tasks that like are just ongoing. Like obviously I'm going to keep making unit tests as we build more features and as we build more functionality. Building documentation, that's pretty straightforward. I need to build documentation out with this, and I want to do it sooner than later. Mostly because no one ever wants to get to the end of a project and be like, oh, so why did I build it this way, right? So like as an example, whenever I make the design decisions for the test cases like we just talked about, justifying that, just explaining my thought process, whether it's right or wrong, if it's in the documentation, or why that design was made, just like if you were to design a network, right? A lot of times you do justify, or you should at least put in the documentation why, maybe a justification for a design decision. Not every design decision, but, some of the big ones that you could have went with A or B and you chose B because of, whatever. So, like I said, not a wrong or right answer, but at least if you give a perspective of your thought process, it may help the end user or the developer. creating an inventory integration page, right? So this one actually, and I don't believe he's here tonight, is from Matt Steele. He brought up the idea of doing a possible integration with like a netbox or single source of truth. So obviously we built out this inventory page, and it's a very basic inventory, but ideally we would like to be able to integrate and have an integration point where we can call the NetBox API and dynamically pull that information into NetCheck. So that way you don't have to maintain two separate inventories, right? Because no one wants to do that. And I will be the first to say my inventory is not going to, outperform or provide more functionality than a, NetBox or, any other kind of source of truth that you may already are using, right? All right, and then the last one here, I kind of just made a note to myself, but it's reviewing the test results table schema. Because I think we talked about it before, but the test results, let me see if I can pop it up here. Open anyway. Oh, I wonder, maybe I don't have the extension installed on this computer. But basically, in the test results page, I can just show you what it looks like from the front end. It just has a success rate, total test pass, and test failed. This is all that's basically in the database. I'd like to be able to add another column or another data point. Maybe it's not exposed in the results page, but a way for you to extract the test names that passed and the test names that failed. That's kind of, and that also, once again, goes into the design, right? Because since the way the results work in pyATS, they roll up. So, like, let's say your BGP neighbor check. Do I want it to say test failed BGP neighbor check, or do I want it to say BGP routing test failed, right? And then you have to dig into it. To me, I think it should be more obvious to the end user, right, of like what failed. I don't think the user should be going around saying, well, my BGP routing test failed and I don't know what failed. Like, that's unfair, I think, to the end user. So that's something I just need to, like I said, review the table schema, figure out what else needs added, and then how to add that. So it is a little higher priority. I put it as a P2, but just got to figure it out. So, and then the last two down here we added during the stream. So, yeah, so let me see, check in the chat. I don't know how comfortable you are about naming the event. That's why. No, I appreciate it, Nick. Thanks for, I appreciate the privacy and the consideration. So, well, I don't want to move too fast, especially with the design consideration. So I initially thought we could maybe work on a couple things here and there, but really kind of talking through it on the stream tonight, it seems like I need to figure out the way we're going to design and organize our test cases in the pyATS framework, since that's obviously the core of it and what's running all these tests. So I got to take some time. It's probably going to be, a couple days. I'll think of an idea, sleep on it, and probably, wake up the next day, hopefully be like, oh, okay, that worked. Or I'll be like, oh, back to the drawing board. So, but I will commit these changes here. Like I said, it's just some JavaScript. So there will be some changes going up tonight. I apologize. Like I said, I was planning to do a little bit of coding, but now kind of going through it, on stream, I don't know how much I want to do or force without having a true design for some of these test cases. So I think that's about it. I don't think I'm using this function. So let me just test to make sure that this is working still, this little check here. So if I do custom validation, so click this, test is started. Okay, so that is working still. So I'm gonna push these changes. Like I said, it's just a little bit of JavaScript, and then go through and kind of think through the design aspect. But I hope you didn't feel like it was any sort of waste of time. I really did want everyone, especially after the last stream, I realized I don't really have a compass of where I'm going, or at least like a written one that you guys, can see or that I can present on stream. So I really wanted to drive some of these points home that, hey, this is where we're going. This is what currently is being worked on. This is in my private Todoist account, so I'm not going to share. I wasn't really comfortable just sharing a link. So if you are curious about that, I'm not going to share anything like that. I may figure out a way actually to track these, move all of this over to GitHub. I believe GitHub has like an issues tracker. Issues really wouldn't be the right word. So I'll try to figure out some way so where it can be more public and for you guys to check in on it, see where I'm at with it. But yeah, I think that's about it for me. I hope, like I said, that you guys, you kind of get a better picture of where my thoughts are. If you have any questions, or if you have any, more importantly, if you have any sort of feedback, like, hey, I think this would be a cool idea, please let me know. Either comment on the video, in the stream, or hit me up on Twitter. I think, either I'll see your comment on the video, or, obviously I'll see your message. So, please let me know if you have any sort of recommendations for the tool. Definitely, we're in the small infant stages of it. So, anything you can put in front of me now, it's better than waiting, months, and for me to have to try to fit something in here. So, Nick says, nope, it was still interesting. Thank you for the time. Yeah, thanks, Nick, for sticking with me. I feel like sometimes, especially when I don't do too much coding, it can probably feel like a lecture for some. So I appreciate, for everyone that was here tonight. And thank you if you're watching. Like I said, it's still, the offer's still out there. If you do have any suggestions, if you made it to this far in the video, please let me know if you have any sort of feedback, anything that you think would make this tool a little bit cooler and a little more useful, especially for network engineers out there. So thank you, and I will see you all next week. All right, see ya.
Till I get up, time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun.